So we just put your home under contract. Now what? Well, whether you're a buyer or a seller, there's a couple of deadlines we're going to have to keep track of. And this is going to be a multiple part series. This one shouldn't take very long. It's honestly pretty simple. So let's get into it. Broad strokes, earnest money is basically money that the buyer deposits to show good faith that they're going to make good on the promise to buy the seller's property. Earnest money is usually non-refundable throughout the entire process up until the final day of finance and appraisal. Anytime past the deadline, the finance and appraisal deadline, that's when it's non-refundable. Earnest money is usually anywhere from 1 to 2% of the purchase price. This can be more, can be less, just depends on what you guys agree on, but 1 to 2% is pretty typical. Earnest money is also due 4 calendar days after going under contract. If you deposit it late, we're in breach of contract, and we got to get that fixed through an addendum. One thing to keep in mind is this money does not go directly to the seller. It just goes into a brokerage trust account or a title company. And when you close earnest money, like I said, it doesn't go to the seller. It actually goes towards the buyer's closing costs. Now, from the buyer's perspective, the more earnest money you have to put down, the more comfortable a seller will be taking your offer. And depending on the market, earnest money may need to go non-refundable before the typical finance and appraisal deadline. This is going to be something we're going to need to talk about during our initial appointment. And as a buyer, you can request that earnest money be held at a title company rather than a brokerage trust account. It doesn't make a huge difference for you, but it can for the seller. Just depends on how experienced the agent is. And as a seller, earnest money is something that's very important to keep track of. Just because they're depositing a ton of earnest money, it doesn't necessarily mean, as a seller, the amount of earnest money a buyer is depositing is something to pay attention to, but it's not necessarily indicative of if they're going to close or not. Because I could deposit $1 million of earnest money, but I still have, 30 days to back out and take it. However, that being said, even if the earnest money amount is lower, but a portion of it's non-refundable before the finance and appraisal deadline, that is more indicative of if they're going to close. For example, someone whose earnest money is non-refundable at the time of acceptance is a lot more likely to close than someone whose earnest money is all the way refundable for 30 days. And in the event the buyer requests that earnest money is held at a title company, you have to be careful with this, because if, for example, the buyers back out right after their finance and appraisal deadline, the earnest money is yours. But both the buyer and the seller have to sign off on the release of it. If the buyers do not sign off on the release of it, it's not going to get released. And typically you're going to have to sue in order to get that money sent to you. And that wraps it up for this video. I appreciate you guys watching. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask, because I have the answers. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. See ya.